The bobber had not moved in 40 minutes, and I was thinking about driving home when the light appeared on the other side of the lake. It was not a flashlight. A flashlight sweeps and bobs when someone carries it. This was a steady pale oval sitting just above the waterline, maybe 2 feet off the surface, drifting south at a walking pace. I figured it was another fisherman on the far bank, some kind of lantern, and I watched it the way you watch anything out of mild curiosity in a quiet place. Then it stopped. I could hear the frogs on my side and nothing else. The oval sat there perfectly still for what I counted as about 3 minutes. Long enough that I set down my rod and stood up from my camp chair. Long enough that I started to feel the stillness of it the way you feel a held breath. It moved again, and this time it was coming across the water toward me. Not along the bank. Across the water in a straight line at that same unhurried walking pace. The lake is a 1/4 mile wide at that point. I know because I have paddled it. There is nothing out there to walk on, no sandbars, no structure. The light came the whole distance without any variation in height and without any sound, and I stood at the edge of my little gravel launch with my hands at my sides watching it come. It stopped about 30 yards out. I could not see anything behind it or beneath it, only the pale, flat glow of it on the black water. We stayed like that for a moment, me and whatever that was. Then my phone lit up with a text from a number I did not recognize that said, "Good spot." Our next story. The call came in at 2:17 in the morning, which I know because I logged it like every other call, time-stamped and assigned a case number before I even finished listening. The man on the line said he was parked on Route 9 near the old grain elevator, the one that burned in 2011 and never got torn down. He said he had pulled over because something was standing in the road. I asked him to describe it, and he was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet where you can hear someone breathing carefully. He said it looked like a person, but it was not moving the way a person moves. I asked him what that meant, and he said the arms were wrong. I asked if he needed medical assistance, and he said no, just please stay on the line. So I stayed. I had the non-emergency frequency going in my other ear, and the overnight supervisor 2 rooms over, and still the room felt very close while I listened to this man breathe on the road 12 miles away. He said it had turned around. He said it was facing the car now. Then he said very quietly that it was walking toward him. I dispatched a unit. The deputy arrived in 9 minutes and found the car pulled to the shoulder, engine running, door open. The man was standing in the field beside the road, about 40 yards out, facing away from the highway. He was unharmed and could not explain how he had gotten there. He could not explain a lot of things. I pulled the call recording the next morning to write my report, and under the ambient noise of that open line I could hear, very faintly, footsteps. 2 pairs of them. Our next story. The generator kicked on at 9:30, same as it had the 2 nights before, and I went back to watching the field behind the house. 3 days snowed in does something to you. You start memorizing things. The shape of the fence posts. The way the drifts had swallowed the bottom rail of the gate. I knew that field the way you know a face. So when I saw the figure standing at the far tree line, I noticed it immediately. It was just a shape. Dark against the white, too far to read. I thought it was probably the Callahan boy from the neighboring property, checking on something, though what anyone would be checking on at that hour in that weather I could not say. I watched for a minute, decided it was a post I had simply never clocked before, and went to make tea. When I came back, the shape had moved. Not far. Maybe 30 feet closer, following a straight line toward the house. There were no tracks behind it. The snow was smooth and unbroken all the way to the trees. I told myself the wind had rearranged the drifts. I told myself I was looking at a trick of porch light. I stood at the glass with my mug going cold and watched the shape stand perfectly still for a long time. Then the generator went quiet. The porch light died. The whole field went dark except for the snow, which gives off its own pale nothing of a glow, and in that glow I could see the shape was closer now. Much closer. Standing just outside where the light used to reach. In the morning, the field was empty and smooth, and there were no tracks anywhere. Not even mine from where I had gone out to look. Our next story. My last patient in Wing C had been discharged by 7, so by midnight I was mostly just walking the hall to stay awake, checking the one occupied room at the far end where Mr. Aldrin slept with his mouth open and the television off. The ward had that particular silence that empty hospitals get, not peaceful, just waiting. I was at the nurse's station refilling my coffee when I heard the call light click on from room 14. I knew that sound the way I knew my own heartbeat. One soft electronic tone, and the little orange square lit up on the board. Room 14 was empty. Had been empty for 6 days since we moved the last patient to the ICU. I told myself the system glitched. They did that sometimes, especially in the older wings, and C wing was old. But I walked down anyway because that is what you do. The door was mostly closed, the way I had left it after I changed the linens that afternoon. I pushed it open and turned on the overhead light, and everything was exactly as it should be. Clean bed, sealed pillow, the tray table folded against the wall. The call button cord was looped over the bedrail the way housekeeping always left it, well out of reach from anywhere a person might be standing. I stood there for a moment, then turned off the light and went back to the station. I logged the malfunction like I was supposed to: time, room number, probable cause, equipment issue. Then I looked at the board again. The orange square for room 14 had gone off. The one for room 12 had come on, and room 12 was 2 doors down from where Mr. Aldrin was sleeping. We only had one patient that night. Our next story. 4 days into my shift at Hemlock Point, I started counting the supply crates just to have something to do. 14 crates, same as Tuesday, same as Monday. The log entry for 6 o'clock read clear skies, visibility 12 miles, and I had written it so many times that my handwriting was starting to look like someone else's. Around 9, I noticed the light on the lower catwalk was swinging. Not in a wind. The air that night was completely still, the kind of still where you can hear the buoy bell a quarter mile out without any trouble. The light was a work lamp I had clipped to the railing that morning, and it was moving in a slow, even arc, like a pendulum finding its rhythm. I went down to check it. By the time I got there, it had stopped. The clip was fastened tight. I shook the railing a little, and the lamp barely trembled. I told myself a wave had sent a vibration up through the rock, which happens sometimes, and I went back up and made a note in the log and forgot about it. An hour later, I heard footsteps on the metal stairs below me. Measured steps, not hurried. 7 of them, then nothing. I stood in the doorway of the watch room and listened for 2 full minutes and heard only the buoy bell and my own breathing. I checked every level of the tower. The exterior door at the base was locked from the inside, the bar still set. I did not sleep well. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I pulled up the station records on my laptop, just reading through old logs to calm myself down. The volunteer before me had left a final entry that said only, counted the footsteps again, still 7. Our next story. I was pulling old insulation out of the attic when I heard the back door open. Not alarming on its own. My wife had a key, and I figured she had come out early to check on the progress. I called down to her. Nobody answered, but I heard footsteps cross the kitchen, slow and deliberate, then stop. I went back to work. Old houses settle, old floors creak, and I had been alone out here long enough to start hearing things in the ordinary sounds of the place. 10 minutes later, I climbed down the ladder, and the kitchen was empty. The back door was closed and locked from the inside, the way I had left it that morning. Her car was not in the drive. I stood there for a moment, then pulled out my phone and texted her. She replied from her office downtown. She had not left yet. I went back upstairs to keep working. The insulation in the far corner of the attic was newer than the rest. I could tell because it was a different brand, a different color, pressed in tight and careful where everything else was crumbling and loose. Someone had replaced just that one section and done it neatly. I pulled it out anyway to check the boards underneath for rot. There was a small wooden chair under there, child-sized, facing the corner. The paint on it was worn thin at the seat and along the top rail, the way furniture gets worn when it is used for a long time by the same person. I had already pulled permits on this house. The records said it had stood empty for 11 years. The chair was not dusty. Our next story. Around 3 in the morning, the pumps go quiet and I usually read, but that night I was watching a moth beat itself against the fluorescent tube above the register when the blue sedan pulled in. It parked at pump 4 and sat there. Engine off, lights off. Nobody got out. I figured the driver fell asleep, which happens more than you would think on that stretch of highway. I went back to my book. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I looked up again and the car had not moved, but the pump handle was out of its cradle. I could see it from the booth, resting in the car's open fuel door, the little green light on the pump face reading active. Someone had gotten out without me seeing them. I watched the number on the pump climb. $4.711. I told myself I had just missed the driver stepping out. My booth light was bright and the lot beyond it was dark, and it was easy to miss things in that contrast. This is what I told myself. The pump stopped at $14 and some cents. The handle went back into its cradle on its own, or someone placed it there. I cannot say which because I did not see a hand. The fuel door swung shut. The car sat for another minute. Then the engine turned over and the headlights came on, and it pulled out slowly onto the highway heading north. I stood up and walked out to pump 4. The receipt had printed. I tore it off and read it under the lot light. It was issued to a card that expired in 2009, and the timestamp at the top read 3:14 a.m., which was 11 minutes before the car had arrived. Our next story. My aunt's bedroom closet took most of the afternoon to clear. By the time I had her shoe boxes sorted into piles and her winter coats laid across the bed, the light outside had gone the color of old paper, and I realized I had not eaten since morning. I went downstairs to find something in the kitchen. The house had that specific quiet that empty houses get, not peaceful but waiting, and my footsteps on the hardwood felt too loud for the space. I put a can of soup on the stove and stood at the window above the sink while it heated. The backyard was going dark. There was a fig tree at the far end that my aunt had planted 30 years ago, and past it a wooden fence, and past the fence a narrow strip of dead grass before the neighbor's property started. I had been staring at nothing in particular when I noticed a woman standing at the fence. She was on my aunt's side of it, just standing there facing the house with her hands at her sides, and at first I thought it was a neighbor come to offer condolences, the way people had been doing all week. I raised my hand at the glass. She did not move. I turned the burner off and went to the back door. When I opened it and looked out, she was gone. The yard was empty. The gate in the fence was latched from the inside, the way I had left it 2 days ago. I went back to my soup and told myself she had slipped out before I reached the door. People move quickly sometimes. It was only when I described her to my cousin that I found out my aunt never had neighbors on that side. Our next story. I pulled into the rest stop outside Elko around 1 in the morning, cut the engine, and poured the last of my thermos coffee into the cap. The lot was empty except for a silver sedan parked under the far light, no one visible inside. Normal enough. Truckers learn to read a rest stop the way you read a face, and that one read fine. I finished the coffee and leaned my seat back. The overhead light on the building was buzzing, flickering the way they do when a moth gets into the housing. I watched it for a minute, then closed my eyes. I do not know what woke me. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of one. The buzzing had stopped. I sat up and looked out at the lot, and the silver sedan was still there, but the driver door was open now, hanging wide, dome light on, and a man was standing maybe 30 feet in front of it facing the dark tree line. just standing, both arms at his sides. I checked my mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me. I looked back at the man and he had not moved at all, not even to shift his weight. I told myself he was probably sick or drunk or just needed air. I watched him for what felt like 4 or 5 minutes and he did not move once. Then he turned around and walked back to his car, unhurried, and closed the door. The dome light went off. The sedan sat there another few seconds, then pulled out of the lot without headlights and drove north up the highway. I got my logbook out and wrote down the plate number because it felt like the right thing to do. When I called it in the next morning, dispatch told me that plate did not exist. Our next story. The back porch light clicked off at 11:43, and I know the exact time because I had just checked my phone to see if the owners had responded to my question about the thermostat. I was house sitting for a couple I had never met, a friend of a friend arrangement, a farmhouse outside Cooperstown that sat on about 40 acres of nothing. The porch light was on a motion sensor. I had read that in the little laminated instruction sheet they left on the kitchen counter. Something had triggered it, and then whatever it was had stopped moving. I told myself it was a deer. I went back to the couch and watched another 20 minutes of something I cannot even remember now. Then the light clicked on again. I looked up at the sliding glass door and the yard beyond it was empty, just the wet grass and the tree line sitting dark at the edge of the property. I went to bed around 1. The bedroom was at the back of the house and the window faced the yard. I left the curtains open because the room felt close and small with them shut. I woke up and the porch light was on again. The clock on the nightstand said 3:08. I lay there watching the lit rectangle of the yard through the glass, and I counted. I counted because I needed something to do with my brain. I got to 60 twice before the light went off. In the morning, I found the laminated sheet on the counter and reread it. The sensor, it said, only trips for movement above knee height to avoid false triggers from the family dog. The family dog had died 2 years ago. The owners mentioned it in their first email to me, apologizing that the house might still smell like him. Our next story. My headlamp had been flickering for the last hour, so I switched it off and sat with the dark for a while. The campfire was down to coals, just enough orange glow to see the tree line, and I was thinking about turning in when I heard someone walking a trail, maybe 50 yards out. Not unusual. Hikers do odd hours. I listened to the footsteps crunch through dry pine needles, steady and even, moving left to right across my position. Then they stopped. I assumed whoever it was had reached their campsite and thought nothing more about it. I had just gotten into my sleeping bag when the footsteps started again. Same direction, same pace, the exact same rhythm. I told myself it was probably just a deer or a raccoon making a racket in the brush, and I almost believed it. Then the sound moved left to right a third time and stopped in the exact same spot. I sat up. I put my headlamp on and unzipped the tent and shone it through the trees. Nothing. Just ponderosas going back into black nothing. I waited a long time before I got back in my bag. An hour passed. Maybe more. I was somewhere between awake and not when the footsteps started again. Same direction. Same pace. Same exact stopping point. I grabbed my phone to check the time, and the lock screen showed me a photo I had never taken. My campsite from an angle outside the tree line, the fire still bright orange, me clearly visible sitting in my camp chair. The timestamp read 2 hours before I had even set up camp. I had not been alone when I arrived. Our next story. The kids had been asleep for 2 hours when I noticed the baby monitor was picking up a second room. The Hargrove house only had 2 children, both upstairs, and I had a monitor for each of them sitting on the kitchen counter. Emma's was on the left, Noah's on the right. Both screens showed their rooms, both showed them sleeping fine. But there was a third audio channel on Emma's monitor, one I had never seen before, and it was putting out sound. Not static. Not interference. It was the low, steady creak of a rocking chair. I assumed the monitor had picked up a neighbor's signal somehow. Old units do that. I sat with it for a few minutes, listening, and the creaking was so regular it was almost relaxing, back and forth, like someone settling in for a long wait. Then it stopped. I watched the screen. Emma's room was dark and still, just the purple glow of her nightlight and her small shape under the blanket. I counted to 60 and told myself the channel had dropped. Then I heard Emma's voice come through, very soft, the way kids talk when they are half asleep and answering a question they heard in a dream. She said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. I was up the stairs before I had decided to move. Her door was open the way I had left it. She was on her side, facing the wall, completely asleep. The room was empty. The rocking chair in the corner, the white one with the cushion her mother used for nursing, was perfectly still. I picked up my phone and sat in the doorway until the parents came home. I never told them the chair was warm. Our next story. Pepper stopped walking at the corner of Aldrich and Fifth, the way she sometimes does when a cat has crossed recently, nose down and tail stiff. I gave the leash a little slack and checked my phone. 4:42 in the morning. We had 3 more blocks before the loop brought us back. The neighborhood was the same as every morning. Porch lights on timers, a recycling bin someone had dragged to the curb early, the low hum of a transformer on the pole above us. I had done this route 200 times. I knew it the way you know your own kitchen in the dark. Pepper would not move. I looked up to see what she was fixed on. Across the street, in the narrow passage between the Greer's house and the vacant lot, a man was standing with his back to me. Still not moving at all, just facing the fence. I thought maybe he had gone in there to relieve himself. Embarrassing but common enough. I tugged the leash and we kept going. When I reached the next corner, I glanced back out of habit. He was on our side of the street now, same posture, back still turned, maybe 30 feet behind us. I had not heard him cross. I walked faster. Pepper kept pace without being told, which she never does. At the next block, I turned around again. He was closer. Same position. Back to me. Standing under the amber light of a street lamp like he had always been there, like I was the one who had moved. I got home and locked the door and sat at the kitchen table until sunrise. My neighbor Carol called that afternoon to ask if I had seen anything on my walk. She said the Greer's dog had been barking since before dawn. Their dog died in March. Our next story. My GPS rerouted me down Callaway Road for the 3rd time that night, and I was starting to wonder if the package was even worth the gas. The address was a farm property, no porch light, just a gravel drive that curved behind a tree line and disappeared. I left the engine running when I got out, the way you do when a place makes you cautious without giving you a reason. I set the box on the steps and was turning back to the truck when I saw the figure standing at the edge of the field. Maybe 60 yards out. Perfectly still. I told myself it was a scarecrow, which was a reasonable thing to think, and I got back in the truck. But the headlights caught it again as I turned around, and it had moved closer to the fence line. Not much. Just enough that the distance was wrong now. I stopped the truck. I sat there watching it through the windshield. It was not moving while I watched it. It was just a shape the size of a person, arms down, no coat despite the cold. I pressed the horn once short, the way you do to announce yourself, and the sound died flat in all that open air. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then the shape turned and walked back into the field, slow and even, and the dark just took it. I finished the route. I told myself it was a farmer or a neighbor or someone out for a reason I did not need to understand. I almost believed that by the time I got back to the depot. The name on the delivery receipt was the same as mine, first and last, down to the middle initial. Our next story. My key card kept rejecting the back door of the dining hall, so I ended up leaving through the loading dock and cutting across the far end of campus, the part nobody really uses after 9. That added about 12 minutes to my walk home, which normally takes me past the old greenhouse complex and then down Mercer Street to my apartment. I was maybe 30 feet from the greenhouse when I saw a man standing inside. The lights were off in there, but there is a row of sodium lamps along the path outside, and they throw enough orange glow through the glass that you can see the shapes of the hanging plants, the long tables, all of that. The man was standing at the far end, completely still, facing the glass. Facing me. I figured it was a groundskeeper or a grad student doing a late watering. Perfectly reasonable. I kept walking. When I was directly alongside the building, I glanced back, and he had moved maybe 20 feet closer to the glass without appearing to have walked there. He was just at a different position, still facing me. I sped up. Not running, just that walk where your heels come down harder than usual. I told myself the angle had shifted, and I had misjudged his position the first time. At the end of the path, I looked back once more because I could not help it. He was pressed against the glass from the inside, one hand flat on the pane, looking out at me. The door to the greenhouse has a combination padlock on it. I know because I looked that up the next morning. The lock had been there since the building was closed for renovation in March. It has been closed since March. Our next story. She was already standing at the curb when I pulled up, which I noticed because the app said I had 3 minutes to arrival, and the pickup was a dirt turnaround off Route 9, no houses visible, nothing but tree line and a broken fence post. No one stands outside waiting in a spot like that at 11:30 on a Tuesday. I confirmed her name through the window. Renata. She nodded and got in the back, and she smelled like cold air and something else I could not quite place, something faintly chemical, like a swimming pool. She did not look at her phone the whole ride. Most people look at their phones. She watched the road ahead, which meant I could see her face in the rear view, and she had this very calm, settled expression, like someone who had already decided how everything was going to go. About 4 miles out, I asked her if she was heading home. She said yes, visiting family. I said that was nice. She said they did not know she was coming. I let that sit. We pulled onto her street, and the house she directed me to was dark, every window dark, and when I stopped, she opened the door before the car was fully stopped, stepped out, walked up the porch steps, and went inside without unlocking anything. No key, no pause. The door just opened. I sat there for a minute. I wrote the trip complete. I drove home. The next morning I got a notification that Renata had left me a 5-star rating, which would be normal except that when I checked the timestamp, it was posted 40 minutes before I ever accepted the ride. Our next story. Every classroom on the east wing was dark and locked, and I was working my way back toward the utility closet when I noticed the drinking fountain running. Not dripping. Running. A full steady stream, the way a kid holds it down for a long drink. I walked over and turned the handle off and stood there for a second listening to the building settle. Old schools make noise. I know that. I finished mopping the main hallway and circled back toward the gym. The fountain was running again. I turned it off a second time and told myself the valve was worn. It was a reasonable thing to think. The district had not replaced anything in that building since probably 2003. I wrote it in my log and kept moving. What made me stop was the wet footprints. They came out of the girls' bathroom near the gym, small ones, bare feet by the look of them, and they tracked down the hallway maybe 30 feet before they stopped. Not faded out the way wet prints do when they dry. They just stopped mid-stride, the way a person stops when they are standing still. I checked the bathroom. Every stall, every corner. The floor was dry inside. The footprints had come from in there, but there was nowhere inside that could have made them. I finished my shift. Clocked out at 11:40, same as always. I talked myself down the whole drive home, the valve, condensation, some explanation I was not thinking of. Kids are not in that building at night. I have the only key. I did not look at my log sheet again until the next evening, and the entry I had written about the fountain was in handwriting that was not mine. Our next story. Floor 7 was always my last stop before I looped back down to the lobby. The elevator opened, I stepped out, and the motion sensors fired on like they always did, lighting the corridor in that flat white that makes everyone look a little sick. I did my walk. Copy room, break room, the row of glass offices along the north wall. Everything quiet, everything locked. I was checking the last door when I noticed the light in the corner conference room was already on. Not the overhead fluorescence. The small lamp on the credenza, the one with the bronze base that facilities used as a staging prop when clients visited. It was on, pointing up at the ceiling, throwing a warm circle of light against the acoustic tile. I stood at the glass and looked in for a few seconds. The room was empty. I figured someone from the evening shift had left it, and I had just missed it on my earlier round. I keyed the door, reached across to the lamp, and clicked it off. When I came back up from the lobby at 2:30, the lamp was on again. I stood in the hallway longer this time. The room was still empty. The chairs were all pushed in, even the one at the head of the table that nobody ever remembered to push in. There was a coffee mug on the table that had not been there before. It was sitting in the center, both hands placed around it, like someone had just set it down before standing up. The mug was still warm. I checked the footage when my shift ended. The camera covering that corridor had logged a clean, uninterrupted feed all night. Nobody had entered that room. Not once. The badge log showed someone had exited it at 2:31. Our next story. Somebody moved into 4B on a Thursday, which was unusual because the building super always did move-ins on weekends when he could be around. I noticed because I work from home, and I heard the footsteps start up around noon, slow and even, crossing from one side of the apartment to the other. Back and forth. I figured unpacking, boxes dragged across hardwood, the ordinary settling in sounds. I put my headphones on and forgot about it. By the second week I realized I had never heard a second voice in there, never heard a phone conversation, never heard the television. Just the walking. Always the same pace, always the same path, what I eventually mapped in my head as a straight line from the north wall to the south wall and back again. 40 steps one way, a pause, 40 steps back. I counted once while I was eating dinner. I mentioned it to my neighbor across the hall, Paula, mostly as a joke. She got quiet and told me 4B had been empty for 6 months before that Thursday. The person on the lace, she said, had given notice the same week. A woman on our floor reported hearing walking sounds through her wall. That woman was in 4A. That was the apartment directly on the other side of 4B from mine. I went to the super the next morning. He pulled up the file on his laptop and turned the screen so I could read it. The lease for 4B had a start date of the coming Saturday, 3 days away. The unit had not been rented yet. He looked at me and I looked at him, and neither of us said anything useful. I hear it again right now. Our next story. Room 11 checked out at midnight, which was unusual, but not the part that bothered me. I was doing the standard walkthrough after the guest left, making sure no towels were missing, checking the bathroom, the usual. The room was fine. Clean almost. Except the television was on, tuned to a channel that was just gray static, and the volume was turned all the way down. I clicked it off and went back to the desk. About 20 minutes later, I looked up at the monitor bank we have behind the counter, 6 small feeds from 6 outdoor cameras. Camera 3 covers the parking lot on the north side, mostly just a long rectangle of asphalt and a single light pole. There was a person standing under that light pole, very still, facing the building. I figured it was the guest from 11 who had maybe forgotten something, so I buzzed the intercom and said we were open if they needed to come back in. Nobody answered. The figure did not move. I watched the monitor for probably 4 minutes. The figure just stood there, arms at the sides, not looking at a phone, not walking toward a car. The parking lot was otherwise empty. After a while, I walked around the desk and looked out the glass front door myself. From that angle, I could see the north lot, and there was nobody there. I went back to the monitor, and the feed from camera 3 showed the figure still standing under the light, perfectly still, facing the building. I have no way to explain that part. What I can say is that when I checked the checkout records in the morning, room 11 had no reservation attached to it. According to the system, nobody had been assigned that room in 4 days. Our next story. Somewhere around the middle of the lake, I reeled in a small base and threw it back. That was the last normal thing that happened. I was drifting, no anchor down, just letting the current nudge me wherever it wanted. The water was flat and the tree line was black against a slightly lighter sky. I had my thermos and a good rod and nowhere to be until morning. That kind of night, you understand. The kind where you stop thinking about much. Then I heard someone rowing. Slow, even strokes, the soft knock of oar against gunwale. I sat up and looked around. Nothing. No running light, no silhouette. I figured a kayaker, no reflectors, some idiot. I almost called out but decided against it. The sound moved from my left to somewhere behind me and then stopped. A few minutes passed. Then I heard it again, closer. I turned the flashlight on and swept it across the water in a full circle. Not one ripple that should not have been there. Perfectly still in every direction, the kind of still that takes a while to come back after a boat passes through. The rowing started again, and this time it was close enough that I could hear the water dripping off the blades between strokes. I was about to shout when it went quiet. Right next to the boat, quiet. I held the light over the side and looked down. The water was dark and smooth, and I could see maybe 2 feet into it. There was nothing there. I sat back. My hand was shaking a little. I told myself it was the cold. I started the motor and headed in, and the whole way back I heard it behind me, keeping pace, never getting closer, never falling behind. Our next story. Dispatch had been dead for 3 hours when the call came through on the non-emergency line. I almost let it roll to voicemail. It was the kind of quiet that makes you lazy, the overhead light humming, my coffee gone cold, a crossword I had given up on sitting face down on the console. I picked up on the 4th ring. The man on the other end said he was calling from Route 9, the old stretch out past the grain elevators. He said there was a woman standing in the road. I started filling out the form. I asked if she appeared injured. He said he did not think so. I asked if she was moving. He paused for a moment and said no, she was just standing there in his headlights, facing away from him, and that she had been there for about 4 minutes without moving at all. I told him I would send someone out and asked him to stay on the line. He agreed. I could hear his engine idling. I radioed the 1 unit we had on that side of town. Took maybe 40 seconds. When I came back to the non-emergency line, I asked if the woman was still there. He said yes, but that something had changed. I asked what he meant. He said she was facing him now, and he did not see her turn. The unit arrived 11 minutes later. No woman, no other vehicle, nothing on the road in either direction. The officer noted it in the log, and that was the end of it. I thought about it the whole drive home. I still do not have an explanation. What I keep coming back to is that the man never asked me how I knew it was a woman. Our next story. On the 2nd day of the storm, I watched a figure cross the back field. That sounds dramatic, but my first thought was genuinely that it was Doug from the farm 2 miles over checking on his cattle. People do that. The snow was coming down soft and the visibility was maybe 40 yards, and the figure was moving at a steady, unhurried walk parallel to the tree line. I watched from the kitchen window because there was nothing else to do. The power had been out since the previous evening, and I was on my 4th cup of reheated coffee, and my phone had 2 bars at best. The figure stopped. It just stood there at the far edge of the yard, facing the house. I told myself it was someone catching their breath, getting their bearings. The wind had picked up and the snow was moving sideways by then, and I could not make out anything specific, just a shape, dark clothing, the right height for a person. I lifted my hand and waved. The figure did not wave back, but it started walking again, this time directly toward the house. I stepped back from the window without meaning to. I watched it cross maybe 20 feet of open yard, and then the snow thickened and it was simply gone, absorbed into the white like it had never been there. I waited. I checked the back door, which was locked. I looked out every window on the ground floor. I stood in the kitchen for a long time listening to the snow settle against the glass. Nobody knocked. Nobody came. On the third morning I found one set of boot prints ending in the middle of the yard, about 6 feet from the back steps, with nothing coming back out. Our next story. My pen light caught the movement before my brain did, a shape passing the small window in the door of room 4, slow and deliberate, the way someone walks when they think no one is watching. I set my chart down. Room 4 had been empty since Tuesday. I knew that because I was the one who stripped the bed after Mrs. Calloway transferred to the 3rd floor, and no one had been admitted to take her place. The census board behind the nurse's station confirmed it. I had looked at that board maybe an hour before. I told myself it was a reflection. The hallway behind me had a cart with a chrome rail, and the overhead fluorescents have always had a subtle flicker on this wing, the kind that makes you doubt your own eyes at 2 in the morning. That is the kind of thing you tell yourself. I walked to the door anyway and looked through the window. The room was dark except for the light coming in from the parking lot outside. The bed was bare. The chair in the corner was empty. Nothing moved. I pushed the door open and stood in the frame for a moment. The room smelled the way empty rooms smell in hospitals, like cleaned surfaces and recycled air. I turned on the overhead light, looked at the closet, looked under the bed, felt the particular embarrassment of a grown adult checking for something they could not name. I went back to my station. I made a note in my personal log, not the official one, just the small notebook I keep in my jacket pocket, because I wanted to write down what I had seen before I convinced myself I had not seen it. When I opened the notebook, there was already a note on that page in my own handwriting that said room 4, passing the window. Our next story. Smoke column 7 was already logged and contained before my dinner got cold, so the rest of the evening should have been nothing. I was washing my single bowl in the basin when the radio clicked. Not a transmission, just a single click, the kind a handset makes when someone presses the talk button and then releases it without speaking. I figured it was a loose connection, or maybe Perry down at dispatch bumping his desk. I set the bowl on the rack and forgot about it. An hour later I was doing my last compass scan of the evening, working the horizon quadrant by quadrant the way they trained us. Everything was clear, the ridgeline dark and still, Ponderosas black against a pale sky. Then I saw the light below the tower. Not a fire, nothing orange or climbing. A white light moving between the trees at roughly the pace a person walks, maybe 200 yards out on the south slope. I picked up the radio and asked Perry if anyone had signed into the access trail that afternoon. He checked the log and said no. I told him about the light. He said it was probably a deer hunter who forgot to register. I said it was 10 at night and the light was moving in a straight line, not scanning. Perry said he would note it. The light stopped. It sat in one spot for long enough that I started counting, and I got to 60 twice before it moved again. It came closer, not fast, just steady. Then it went out. I waited by the window for a while. Nothing came out of the tree line. In the morning, I climbed down to check the trail. There were no boot prints in the dust, but there were 2 of mine from the day before, and next to them, a single clear print pointing toward the tower. Our next story. Scraping wallpaper in the east bedroom, I found a door. It was not hidden exactly. Just papered over, flush with the wall, a thin seam I had mistaken for a crack in the plaster. The handle was ceramic white, the kind they stopped making in the 50s. I stood there for a moment with my putty knife, and then I pulled it open. A staircase went down, narrow, smelling of turned earth and something sweet I could not place. The farmhouse had no basement listed in the inspection, no basement on the original blueprints the county had on file. I had gone through those documents twice before closing. I told myself it was probably a root cellar, common in houses this age, just missed by whoever drew the plans. I went back to the kitchen, got my flashlight, and started down. The stairs opened into a small square room. Dirt floor, fieldstone walls, a single wooden shelf along the back holding 4 mason jars. The jars were empty but clean, recently cleaned, the lids still bright without a spot of rust. In the center of the floor there was a chair, facing the stairs. A wool coat was folded over the back of it, and a paperback book sat closed on the seat, a library bookmark tucked inside. I picked up the book. The spine cracked a little, the way a new book does when you open it for the first time. The library stamp on the inside cover was dated 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks before I signed the closing papers, 1 week before the house was legally mine. I left the coat and the book and came back upstairs. I have not gone down again. The chair was not facing the stairs when I left. Our next story. Pump 3 rang up a fill at 2 a.m. and I thought nothing of it. Out here on Route 9, that stretch between the soy fields and the grain elevator, we get maybe 4 cars a night. Truckers mostly. A fill at Pump 3 meant someone pulled in, which meant I should see headlights sweep the lot, which I did not. I walked to the window. The pump handle was seated. The display read $12.40. The lot was empty. I checked the camera feed on the small monitor behind the register. The Pump 3 angle showed the hose hanging exactly as I had left it after my last customer, 3 hours before. No car. No person. I figured the pump had glitched, wrote it down in the log, and poured myself more coffee. 20 minutes later, Pump 3 rang up again. $11.08 this time. I stood at the window for a long time. Yellow lot lights, pavement, nothing else. The fields past the chain link were black. I could hear the cooler humming behind me, the ticker on the register, my own breathing. I told myself it was a billing error, some crossed wire in the system. Then I looked at the receipt tape, which prints automatically with every transaction. The first receipt had printed normally. Pump 3, $12, the timestamp. The second receipt had printed too, same format. There was a third receipt already curled in the tray that I had not heard print. I had not heard it because it was already there when I looked. Same pump, $9.50, timestamped 4 minutes in the future. I looked out at the empty lot. The hose on Pump 3 was swinging slowly, like someone had just let go. Our next story. Grandma's television turned on by itself around midnight, and I told myself it was a power surge. I had been in the house for 3 days by then, boxing up her kitchen, sorting clothes into piles for donation, the kind of slow grief work that keeps your hands busy so your head does not have to be. The house was outside Fulton, down a county road with no neighbors close enough to see the lights. I had her old portable heater running in the living room, and a cup of tea going cold on the coffee table. The television clicked on to static. I got up, turned it off at the set, and went back to my tea. 20 minutes later it came on again, same static, same low hiss. I unplugged it from the wall. I stood there looking at it for a second, then went to bed. In the morning I went to plug it back in and found the cord already in the outlet. I pulled it out and looked at it, turned it over in my hands. It was plugged in. I had unplugged it, I was certain of that. I remembered the specific resistance of the prong against my fingers. I left the cord on the floor and spent the day in her bedroom going through papers. That evening I came back to the living room and the cord was plugged in again. The television was off. Everything else in the room was exactly as I had left it. The heater humming, my cold cup on the table, her reading glasses folded on the arm of the chair. Her reading glasses that I had packed into a box that morning and sealed with tape and carried out to my car. Our next story. Headlights off, engine ticking down. I was eating a cold sandwich in the cab when I noticed the woman standing at the edge of the lot. She was maybe 50 yards out, just past the reach of the sodium lights, standing completely still near the tree line. I figured she was a passenger stretching her legs, maybe from the one other rig parked 2 spaces over. I took another bite and looked down at my phone. When I looked up, she had not moved, not even shifted her weight. Most people fidget. She just stood there facing the trees, arms at her sides. I watched her for a while, long enough that it started to feel strange. I told myself she was probably having a rough night, maybe sick, maybe just needed air. I rolled my window down a couple inches, and the lot was completely quiet. No wind. No crickets. Just the low buzz of the vending machine by the bathrooms. Then she turned around very slowly and faced my direction. I could not make out her face from that distance. But she raised one arm and pointed at my cab, slow and deliberate, like she was identifying something. Not waving. Pointing. I reached over and hit my locks, which I know sounds stupid, but it was automatic. I sat there maybe 2 minutes without moving. She did not move either. I finally leaned on my horn once, short, just to break the tension, and the sound cracked across the whole empty lot. She was gone before the echo died. I checked my mirrors, both sides, then got out and walked to the spot by the tree line. The ground there was soft from recent rain. There were no footprints. Our next story. The front door closed on its own around 9. I told myself it was the wind, even though all the windows were shut. The Hargrove house sat at the end of a private road in central Vermont, surrounded by old maple trees, and I had been there 3 days without seeing another person. I was comfortable. I had their Wi-Fi password and a casserole in the fridge, and absolutely no reason to feel uneasy. I went back to reading. Around 11, I got up to get water and noticed the chair at the kitchen table had been pulled out. Not far, maybe 6 inches, just enough that someone could sit in it. I had eaten at the counter all 3 days, never touched that chair. I pushed it back in and stood there for a moment with my hand on it. I checked the doors. Both locked. I walked every room, turned on every light. Nothing. I slept with the hall light on, which felt embarrassing and necessary at the same time. In the morning, I found the chair pulled out again. Same chair, same 6 inches. The casserole dish was on the counter, lid off, a single clean spoon resting beside it. I had eaten the last of the casserole the night before. The dish had been empty and rinsed and sitting in the drying rack. I called the owners. Carol Hargrove picked up on the second ring, and I told her what I had found, keeping my voice level, framing it like a curious question rather than what it actually was. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said that her mother used to sit in that chair. Her mother, she said, had died in the house 2 years ago.